1. This hangout is on air live, so watch what you say. Welcome in. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, Gene Bramall. We're the Quaternary, man, and we're here to talk about fantasy football and here to discuss this great game that we love and take you around the table to kick things off. Bloom, I want you to note that I'm wearing Chatfield Chargers colors because it's a big rivalry week for Chatfield. It's Columbine week. So Columbine, Chatfield, they are the big rivalry for years and years. And tomorrow night we'll see who comes out on top between 2, 3, and 4 teams. Varsities, anyway.
Is there a ceremonial trophy, or does the winners get to use the Chatfield Reservoir, or how does this work? See, I'm showing a little bit of geographical knowledge. I've actually camped at the Chatfield Reservoir before.
Nice. That's like a stone's throw from my house.
Yeah, right across the loop there.
C470, yeah, exactly. So, Bloom, you're looking very dapper tonight in your grandpa's shirt.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm wearing a shirt with a collar, it's probably my grandpa's shirt. And, yeah, we can see – I'm watching Chris Ivory do his thing, and it's great to watch. One of the nice things about Twitter is you can see a lot of people saying, hey – this Chris Ivory, he's a pretty good running back. He's been a pretty good running back since he's been with the Saints, but now we're seeing the Jets really use him like a feature back, and he's delivering, and he actually scored a touchdown to give them the lead. This is a good back-and-forth game, not a Thursday night stinker, and I'm encouraged. This could be 2 good Thursday night games in a row.
Yeah, we'll keep you up to date on what's going on in that contest. And Matt Waldman, my hat collection is rather boring because it's just different colors with NFL shields. But your hat collection, my friend, my God.
That's that was probably the one thing I did get from my grandpa was a love for all sorts of different hats. Though I think his stuck to fedoras, and I don't think I have even have a fedora yet. So I'll have to kind of raid Bloom's closet, maybe see if I can find one from there. But
Cotton Blends.
Yes, Cotton Blends. There you go. See, I'm in Raiders gear, it looks like, here really more than anything else, even though my local high school team in this area is the Purple Raiders, but I didn't get the memo because I'm new to this town, so I'm just in normal Raiders gear.
We'll be talking about Andre Holmes a little bit later, and yes, I do have my bottle opener ready for that. Dr. Gene Bramall, no hat tonight since baseball season ended for the Reds. You're not wearing a hat anymore.
No hat. My grandfathers didn't leave me any hats, but my grandfather, one of them, was very good at farting with his trombone, so I have that to add to things tonight.
I do have a trombone, and we can attempt to recreate that, and for nostalgia, to get you back to that happy place, the safe place.
Can you play Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head with a fart interlude? That's the question.
I don't know if it would be in key. Does it have to be in key?
I don't think farts are ever in key, are they?
Are they in rhythm?
Boy, this got weird in a hurry.
It's only weird if you make it weird.
You opened the door, buddy.
Yeah.
So we have a new agenda for Vegas, or an added part to the agenda for Vegas, and we got an added agenda tonight. And talking injuries with Dr. Gene Bramall, then we'll go through some of the hottest news and notes from around the National Football League. Take you about an hour and a half or so. Call it good and start drinking or whatever. So, Dr. Gene, let's start with you tonight and going across these major injuries from the NFL, of course, Dr. Gene Bramall. And before we jump in, I do have to remind you about FanDuel.com, sponsor for the show. That's FanDuel.com. You love fantasy football, huh? What do you love? Cash? Huh? Check it out, FanDuel.com, where the money is real. You can go there and win if you're good enough at FanDuel.com. Weekly fantasy football leagues, revolutionizing the game of fantasy football. You got your team, got some suspended guys, some hurt guys, some slappies. Don't worry about that. Relive the excitement of the draft every single week with FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. I want you to sign up today. Okay, Dr. Gene, footballguys.com, the place to go for all of Gene's information and the injury reports therein. We look and we start with one of the biggest stars in the league, Calvin Johnson. Give us the latest here. Not practicing. They're saying, well, hopeful, using the hope word. It still could be a while before we see Calvin Johnson. What's the latest there, Dr. Gene?
Yeah, I think not practicing again today, and we've seen Calvin Johnson not practice on Wednesday and Thursday and then go ahead and play. I don't think that's going to be the case this week. We talked a little bit about this on the waiver wire show, that it's a lot easier for these star players who do whatever they can to get back on the field to play through injuries to sit out extra weeks once they've already missed 1 week. Once they see that there's been some interval healing, how well they'll do when they're not faced with a Sunday game day setback, even if they're playing as a decoy of sorts or those sorts of things. When they don't take a risk of game day and feel how they feel the following week, just makes it that much easier for them to say, okay, well, I'm not going to push it to come back the next week. Not that they're competitive, not that they're not tough. It's just a situation where it makes more sense to, once you've missed one game, you may as well sit until you're fully ready to go. And that's what Johnson is saying. He said last week he doesn't want to do anything until he's assured that he can do it at a high level. And he's still claiming he's got some lingering soreness. That's to be expected with a high ankle sprain, even a low-grade issue. And we're staring that week 9 by right in the face with Calvin Johnson. So I don't think I'd rule him out all the way through that time period. Week 8 next week is still a possibility, but I'll be surprised if we see him this weekend.
Gene, what do we really know about Jimmy Graham's injury? And how can we comfortably predict? Obviously, the Thursday night game started, so if you're weighing Jace Amaro against him, but as we get closer to Sunday and people have to evaluate their backup, who they may have to start, and the chances that they're going to start them, maybe even drop their backup to open up another roster spot, we're getting some mixed signals here.
Yeah, and that was to be expected. We've been talking about this for 10 days, especially since it's over the bye week. New Orleans is like this with player injuries a lot anyway. But this is to be expected with Jimmy Graham. We saw this last year with his injury. We've seen this at other times with Saints injuries, not knowing exactly what to expect. And I don't think you can comfortably predict what's going to happen this weekend. And they threw a big old wrench in the works on Thursday, today, when they said that Jimmy Graham was limited in practice. Does that mean that he's just getting some conditioning in, or does that mean that he's preparing to increase his practice participation on Friday and try to play this week? I don't know. We had a lot of good national media sources, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, the usual suspects, telling us that it was going to be a good 2 to 3 weeks before Jimmy Graham got back on the field. So it's a surprise to see him practice today, but I don't know that I would go against what we were hearing earlier this week. It was enough of an injury that it was difficult for him to come back to the game and play. He played a couple of more snaps, 2 or 3 more snaps, had a couple of extra catches, took 1 more shot on that shoulder, 2 pretty good shots total on that shoulder a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago. So it does make sense, given what we've seen with Jordan Cameron and a few other players. We know that these mid-grade shoulder sprains can be 2 to 4 week absences. I would not rule out Jimmy Graham for this weekend. I think there's a situation where you could make an argument that we could see the same thing that we saw from him last year, which is that he'll play in high leverage situations. They won't put him in a place where he has to go over the middle and catch passes. They won't put him in a place where he has to take a lot of jams at the line of scrimmage, where he can be used in that sort of role. And if you can get Jimmy Graham for those 20 to 25 snaps, then maybe you can risk putting him out there knowing that his shoulder isn't quite right. I think the best hope we have at this point is that hopefully we get some sort of information on Sunday morning about exactly where we are with this injury and exactly how likely he is to play. But I think, in the beginning I said be prepared for him to be a game time decision in week 7. As this week started, after he was said to be out for 2 to 3 weeks, I said prepare for him to be a game time decision in week 7. I think that's where we are. Things haven't changed. If you've got to get somebody, hopefully you've done that already, where you've got a hedge in place to be able to be used if Graham isn't ready to go. But that's where we are. I don't think we're going to get any more information than that until 11:30 on Sunday morning.
So my lovely smart alecky wife asked me to ask my friend, the smart alecky doctor, a couple of years ago, a question about her torn Achilles, and his response was, "I don't know. I'm a pediatrician." So in the ensuing questions after that, my wife would say, "Can you ask Gene something? But first ask him if kids have Achilles, because apparently they don't." So today I'm going to ask you in honor of my wife. Do kids have toes? So we could talk about AJ Green and his toe and what's going on with what you quoted here about him. You don't expect him to be out indefinitely, but you don't think he's going to return to week 8. What's making you think that?
Yes, kids have toes. Kids have toes, Alicia. And happy anniversary to the Waldmans, by the way. Hopefully you aren't talking about toes and Achilles on your anniversary, but you know how that goes. Yeah, AJ Green is another tough situation. I don't think it's clear what his injury is. We've heard that it was more than turf toe. Will Carroll and others have said more than turf toe in this situation means more than one toe, not that it's worse than turf toe. He's been to see a specialist, more than one specialist, on a couple of different occasions. The local media around here, I'm relatively close to Cincinnati Sports Talk Radio, doesn't seem to want to give up the ghost on AJ Green and keep reporting that, no, he wasn't back at practice today. Well, he's not going to be at practice this week, and he's not going to play this week. I just don't see that happening. AJ Green is kind of calling himself week to week when everybody else wants to call him day to day, and I think he realized in that moment when he slammed his helmet down after coming off the field on the practice field a couple of weeks ago, was that this isn't something that was going to heal quickly, and that it was going to be something that he could continue to play through without still being able to do everything he wants to do. And just like Calvin Johnson, it really seems like AJ Green and the Bengals are taking the approach that they want this to be as close to full strength as they can get it, as minimal risk of re-aggravating it as they can get it before they let him back on the field. I don't think that's going to be this week. Whether it's next week or not is hard to know. I do actually think it's a good thing that Marvin Jones went on injured reserve because it gives us a little bit better sense. I thought that they were maybe they were just waiting for the specialist visits, but I was kind of thinking that they were hedging on Marvin Jones because they didn't know exactly what was going on with AJ Green. So I think it's a good sign that they were comfortable putting Marvin Jones on IR and allowing him to have surgery rather than trying to nurse him through the next month or so because they didn't know where AJ Green stood. I think there's been enough specialist visits now that we can reasonably conclude that AJ Green is not going to have surgery and that the expectation is that he is going to improve and be able to play again at some point this year. And in the two games where he tried to play through this, he was pretty productive. He didn't look all that limited aside from the one game where he had to leave early. But the game before the bye week, the game after the bye week, were pretty good efforts from him. So if they can get that toe cooled off a little bit, then I think we see the AJ Green that we're used to seeing. And although I don't think that's going to be this week, I don't think it's going to be much past this week either.
He is Dr. Gene Bramall, of course, footballguys.com, and Inside the Injury Report, something you got to check out. Football Guys Insider Pro subscribers can check that out. I want to stick with Cincinnati quickly and talk about what Marvin Lewis said, Dr. Gene. And as a medical professional who deals with high school football teams and obviously know these injuries better than any of us out there, and so many people look to you for medical advice, when you hear Marvin Lewis, who is old school, I've had a chance to hang out and hang around Marvin Lewis at an airport in Charlotte. He's an old school guy, all about the game, all about football. But when he says something like, there's a lot of attention paid to it, quote, I don't know why concussions, linger longer. I don't remember them lingering like they do now. Now we have found that because of the media and things, they seem to linger longer. And obviously, infuriating Eric Winston, former NFL player and NFL Players Association president. You saw his comments on Twitter. We talk about education, educating the fans, educating younger players, and there is a trickle-down effect, but there's still some old-school thinking out there. We'll get to Ron Rivera in a little bit, but how infuriating is it for you, Dr. Gene, to hear something like that from a man who has a large platform and to know that it's not just Marvin that thinks this. There's a lot of old school coaches out there like, why are you taking so long? What are you, soft?
Yeah, and I won't deny that it's a little bit frustrating to continue to hear not only comments like Marvin Jones, but for team Twitter accounts and team public relations department to call concussions mild as they did with Kelvin Benjamin in Carolina this week. But I think, in my mind, I see it as a chance to educate folks because there's been a clear difference in how parents bring potential head injuries to the attention of medical providers, athletic trainers on the sidelines, all of those folks now versus how it was done 5 to 10 years ago, where if you brought a kid to be seen for a concussion at all, it was probably because they got knocked out. And there was some discussion about, how soon can they go back? And now the discussion has changed. They really want to know, does my child have a concussion, and how long should I hold them out, not how long and how soon can I get them back on the field? So it's a little bit frustrating to hear things from Marvin Lewis like that, but I think it's a reasonable education. I do think, Marvin Lewis's comments were, I think there was enough in there to suggest that he thinks that it might be taking a little bit too long for players to be cleared from concussions. And you can see how somebody worried about the depth chart, who's old school, who'd been around for 20, 30 years in the game of football, sees a 5 to 7 day return to play protocol in which at least 2 to 3 of those days he's got a player in his sights that does not have any symptoms at all, but has not yet been cleared to come back for full practice and may not yet be cleared to come back to the game, wondering why, and you can sort of see why the word linger might be used. Why is the recovery clearance process taking so long now, much longer than it did 2 or 3 years ago, even 2 to 3 decades ago for sure? And if, what I put out on Twitter was, if that's the case, if it really is the media and the concussion lawsuit or whatever it may be that's made these things linger a little bit longer and made made concussions a little bit more out there in the public, I don't know that that's true necessarily, but if it is, good. I think that means we're making a difference in education. I think that means we're bringing it to the forefront and holding everybody, from we as medical providers to coaches to players themselves, more accountable for the health and recovery of head injuries. And if that's the case, I'm fine if he sees it that way. I think he's incorrect. I think he's misinformed. I don't know that he's deliberately fussy about all these situations, or if he meant those words in exactly the way that they came out. But I don't think it's anything to apologize for. You are not going to make those in the media and those medical providers that are caring for these athletes, young and old, feel badly about putting this out there in the limelight a little bit more.
I want to drill down on this topic a little bit because this might not have been what Marvin Lewis meant, but you've brought up before both, I believe it's part of the concussion rules that players are not allowed to talk to the media after concussion. Is that right?
Yeah. I got in trouble with the Broncos because I texted C.J. Anderson after he was concussed in the preseason just to see if he's okay. I mean, he's a friend of mine. I just want to see if he's okay. And I texted him. He said, "I'm good. They want to be careful." And I tweeted that, and then the Broncos emailed me and texted me, and they're like, "You can't do that." So, yeah, you cannot communicate with a player that's in the concussion protocol while they're in it. You cannot have any communication with them.
So I wanted you to flesh that out a little bit and ask you your opinion, or if you know what the basis of that is. And also, you often use that as an indicator of not necessarily concussed players, but other injuries, whether a player is made available to the media is a good sign of whether they're going to play or not. And again, unpack what's underneath that. And underneath all of this, let's go ahead and throw Kelvin Benjamin in the mix here, because the Panthers they listed it as the classic mild concussion on their Twitter account when they announced it. There's more. There's talk. They're trying to be optimistic about it. I suppose if we're predicting whether Benjamin's going to play, we have to ask maybe. And I think we want to give the Panthers doctors the benefit of the doubt. But have they already kind of decided this, or what they hope the answer is? And again, just the subjectivity of some of these things as we're on this discussion of players being cleared after concussions.
Okay, let me see if my brain hasn't been concussed recently. Let me see if I can keep all of this straight. So remind me if I miss something in there.
Sure,
I'm taking some
sorry.
notes along the way. No, that's fine. So first of all, the media. I think the media interview is a good indicator of whether or not a player can get back onto the field in a given week. However, that's team by team by team. There are some teams that don't want any injured players talking to the media. They don't want any injured players giving off just any information at all. So there may be some players, we've seen Calvin Johnson, we've seen A.J. Green talk to the media earlier in the week in weeks where they were not likely to play. That's happened with Calvin Johnson on Wednesday this week. It happened with A.J. Green a couple of weeks ago. And it happens more with star players than it does lesser players. Those players are just going to be available to the media in the locker room on most days, whether they're injured or not. If they're not in the treatment room actively getting treatment, then a lot of times it just makes sense for teams to make them available to the media. So the fact that Calvin Johnson was talking to the media on Wednesday this week does not mean that I think it's likely that he plays this week. I think Friday is a big day for that. If they're clearing players to talk to the media on Friday after a week full of limited practice, then I think we can kind of tease out what's said in those interviews to decide whether or not a player. So yes, I do like to use that as kind of a communication there. The concussion protocol thing, certainly within the first 24 hours, no player is supposed to be available to the media for any post-game interviews if they've been diagnosed with a concussion. They are to be observed until it's decided that they're safe to go home from the locker room, wherever they are, home or away. And then some teams will allow a player to talk within the concussion protocol. Not often, but in those first couple of days in the exercise, when they go from light exercise to more strenuous exercise to more football-related activities, sometimes you'll see players in the locker room then. But for the most part, players will not talk at that point, and it is mandated in the return-to-play protocol that they are not to be made available to media in those first 24 hours. But for the most part, I think Cecil's right, and that maybe every team is similar to the way the Broncos like to do things, which is to not allow their players to talk to the media at all until they've seen the independent neurologist and have been cleared, just to keep any confusion out of the works from that standpoint. So Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin is interesting for two reasons. One, the mild concussion issue, we don't grade concussions anymore. As recently as 4 or 5 years ago, the American Academy of Neurology used to say grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 based on whether or not you were knocked out, how long you were knocked out, certain symptoms like amnesia, in which way, if you could remember before the play, after the play, would put you in a different grade of concussion. We don't do that anymore. Either you have symptoms of a concussion or you do not. There are certain symptoms that make it a little bit less likely for you to recover quickly, certain types of amnesia being one of them. Loss of consciousness is not one of them. So a player that's knocked out is not, the studies do not suggest that they're more likely to recover than another player who wasn't knocked out are. But I think that's where the mild comes in, is if a player cannot open his eyes because the light bothers him so much, that symptom is maybe a little bit more severe than a player who just has to squint a little bit. A player who throws up 5 or 6 times with head injury type symptoms because they're dizzy and foggy or whatever else versus a player that doesn't throw up at all, maybe that's a more quote-unquote severe symptom. But those symptoms in and of themselves do not mean mild, moderate, severe concussion. I don't think you can say a concussion was mild versus significant until the symptoms are gone. So if you've got a player that's had 2 weeks of symptoms, if you've got a Nick Roach, yes, I think you can say that concussion was a little bit more severe than another player who's cleared to play within 3 days. Is that fair? I don't know. Even severe in that sense may not be a truly medical term. Some of this still comes in where you can, if you look up guidelines for traumatic brain injury, where we're talking about concussions versus bleeding in the brain versus really severe bleeding in the brain, then there's a gradation of traumatic brain injury where some people might call a concussion a mild TBI versus, if you've been hit so hard in the head where you've got bleeding inside the skull, that's a more significant TBI. So if you want to discuss that in those terms, maybe there's a medical gradation in there. But if you are diagnosed with a concussion and there isn't anything else going on medically inside your skull in terms of a gross amount of bleeding, a large amount of bleeding inside the head, then there's really no framework for mild, moderate, severe within a concussion. So that's the first thing. The second interesting thing about Benjamin, and that's what all this is leading up to, is how likely is he to play this weekend? The difficult thing about Kelvin Benjamin is a lot of these guys that get cleared within 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, we've talked about this before too, that the concussion protocol was meant to be 5 days, 24 hours of no exercise, 24 hours of light exercise, 24 hours of more moderate exercise, 24 hours of strenuous exercise, and then football-related activity. NFL teams will sometimes do it a little bit more quickly than that because they feel like they can watch them more closely and they can advance them safely a little bit more quickly than what your standard youth athlete would be able to do because they're not being monitored 10 to 12 hours a day by the medical staff. So we will see some teams clear people within 3 to 4 days. We've seen players who are concussed on Sunday come back on Thursday. But generally it's a 5-day situation. So it's an issue when Kelvin Benjamin shows up in the locker room on Monday symptomatic because he's already not made that first 24-hour period of having no symptoms since the initial injury. So that puts him already behind the 8 ball a little bit in being able to meet that 3 to 5 day protocol. So, and it makes the team less likely to want to combine two 24-hour stages into one when he's already taken a little bit longer to get through that first stage. So I think what that tells me is that it's very likely that he's going to stick to, at minimum, the 24-hour protocol in the beginning. And it also says that the clock hasn't started yet, even on Monday. So I will be surprised if he's sent to the independent neurologist for clearance on Friday. It may be something that can happen on Saturday. We've seen some teams do that. I wouldn't rule him out from Sunday's game yet, but I think this is a clear situation where this is not the hope that you'll get a player that's not having any symptoms on Monday, and you can start them progressing through the protocol on Monday. That's not happening. He's not even going to take the first step. And we don't know where he is in the protocol. Still wasn't practicing on Thursday. That doesn't mean that he hasn't been allowed to do a little bit of exercise and he's not in stage 2 or 3 of 5. But there should be real concern, and we're not hearing much of this out there yet. And I really haven't put it out there much on Twitter. It's just been a little bit too crazy for me the last couple of days. Maybe we'll do that this evening. There should be real concern that Kelvin Benjamin is not going to be cleared to play this weekend. In fact, I would work under the assumption, if you own Kelvin Benjamin on a fantasy team, that he is not going to play this weekend, and then be pleasantly surprised if we hear that he has been sent to the independent neurologist either on Friday afternoon or even Saturday, because I think that's the most likely time. If it's going to happen, we're probably going to hear about it on Saturday. But prepare for Kelvin Benjamin not to play this weekend.
Gene, really quick.
I hit everything there, didn't I?
You did. No, fantastic. Nailed the dismount too. Really quick. It appeared that he might have suffered the concussion early on in that game. Could that be related to why he's behind compared to other players?
Yeah, I don't know. There's still going to be a problem at every level of sports, and this isn't specific to football. Any sport where there's the potential of a collision and a head injury, players may not report their symptoms. Either, they don't feel like they're that important, or, we've heard from Peyton Manning, Brian Urlacher, or lots of other players that they will actively try to hide those symptoms if they can. We saw players in the playoffs last year. We saw Vontaze Burfict fight to stay on the field at different points. We've seen that already this year. Guys like Antonio Brown, Jake Locker. If you just look at Vontaze Burfict, even last week, if you look at what happened to them on the field, if you take a close look at the video, it's really hard not to think that they were concussed, and those players will sometimes stay on the field. So yes, if Kelvin Benjamin was having symptoms then, continued to play, and we know that's part of what the exercise protocol is all about. We know that exercise, stressing the brain in any way, cognitively, just by thinking, or physically, can make those symptoms last a little bit longer or worse. So if he tried to play through a mild headache or a little bit of grogginess this weekend, yeah, it'd be a little bit more likely for those symptoms to linger into Monday. I don't think we have any evidence or any knowledge for sure that that's what happened to him. We just know that that's where he is on Monday, and that puts him in a little bit different category to get him through the protocol for the rest of the week.
So, Gene, let's take a dynasty slant and go back to Cincinnati and talk about another Marvin, and talk about Marvin Jones and his foot. Is this an issue where we could be looking at Marvin Jones and going, what could have been, the same way that some of us were looking at Vincent Brown and wondering if this is going to be one of those type of issues where it could affect him long term?
Sure. Again, this is the Bengals, and the Bengals, more than any other team out there, they will try to be as non-specific and arguably misleading with injuries as possible. And this has happened with the Bengals before. It's a different medical staff out there, but there have been times, and it's not specific to the Bengals, and sometimes injuries are difficult to diagnose. But this is something that's apparently been going on since February or March, cropped up on him in OTAs long before the Jones fracture that he had in his foot, and tweaked it again. And it just seems like now that if we're understanding what's coming out correctly, if the reports are correct, that they're just now understanding what this injury specifically is and what needs to be done about it. And I don't know that I've been thinking about what this may be, what sort of ankle injury would be off and on that would allow him to do some things in OTAs and then look good immediately after he came back, was cleared to practice in training camp, and then do okay for the first couple of days after coming back from this Jones fracture that wouldn't heal and recover over that time frame. And now all of a sudden he needs to see Dr. Anderson in Charlotte, the preeminent foot and ankle surgeon that all of these guys go to, and need surgery. I'm not sure what that diagnosis is going to be. And something that lingers for this amount of time, we're talking 6 to 9 months from whenever the original injury, and may even been more chronic than that, makes you think cartilage, makes you think some unusual stress fracture that's not healing, all of those things. And Dr. Anderson, when you hear that name, you're always thinking about, well, it's something more than, and all these orthopedic surgeons can take care of all these problems, but when you end up at a noted specialist like this that does all of the tough cases, you have to wonder what's going on. And I don't think we're going to know. The Bengals, they didn't tell us what was going on with Tyler Eifert. We wouldn't have any idea what was going on with AJ Green if Green wasn't talking to Bob Holtzman and talking to the media himself over the past couple of weeks. So I wouldn't expect to hear anything about Marvin Jones. I think the hope would be that we hear that he's cleared for OTAs pretty early, that things are going a little bit better, and that he's cleared for practice next year. If that's not the case, then I think all sorts of alarm bells do have to go off. It's a totally different decade, but we saw this with Chris Perry, saw this with Kenny Irons, two other guys with ankle injuries in Cincinnati that just couldn't get over whatever else was going on. And you mentioned Vincent Brown. We did know exactly what Vincent Brown's injury was, but whenever you're talking about the ankle ligaments, it's a big joint, it's a weight-bearing joint, there's cartilage involved there, just like the knee, and if these things don't heal and they become chronic, it can be tough to heal surgically. So until we know specifically what's going on with Jones from a diagnostic perspective, and or we see him back in some sort of meaningful capacity on the practice field, I do think you have to entertain the possibility that Marvin Jones may never get back to the player that we saw him be last year in 2013.
Dr. Gene Bramwell. Bringing up Chris Perry, I still can't believe Michigan gave him 50 carries. You'd expect Brady Hoke to do something like that. Let's take Dynasty Angle a couple more times around the loop, if you will, Dr. Gene, and we appreciate your time as always here on the Audible Live, Thursday night, footballguys.com. From a Dynasty perspective, this injury for Victor Cruz, everybody hates this injury because everybody loves Victor Cruz. Torn right patellar tendon, ending his season, facing a daunting recovery, and different than, let's say, what Greg Childs went through multiple times. But as we saw, Childs never was able to regain what he was early on in his career at Arkansas. So with Victor Cruz, from a dynasty perspective, how much of a concern is this type of injury for this wide receiver with, speed being a big asset of his game?
Yeah, it's a big concern, and tendons are generally a bigger concern than ligaments. So patellar tendon, Achilles tendon is a bigger deal right now than an ACL injury, simply because it's a little bit more difficult repair, and the surgeons are getting much better at doing it, much better at rehab. But this is just a tough injury. The patellar tendon is not any bigger than the Achilles tendon, and it's not quite as important for explosiveness and lateral agility, but it's important. And it has to be rehabbed differently than the Achilles tendon. One of the things that has been going on with the Achilles surgeries recently is they've been, within the first week, getting the foot out of the boot, getting the foot out of the cast after surgery, and doing some range of motion stuff. And that is huge for limiting scarring, for improving the tensile strength of the tendon, and making sure that it gets back to not being too tight, not being too loose. That really does not happen with the patellar tendon. These injuries are immobilized for a good period of time after the surgery. So the loss of quad strength, of hamstring strength, of not knowing exactly what the strength in the tendon is, of stiffness and scarring, all of that stuff is a bigger deal with a patellar tendon injury than it is with an Achilles tendon injury. And you guys have heard me argue a lot over the past 2 or 3 years with these Achilles tendons. Don't get too bent out of shape about them because of the way the surgical techniques have changed, the way the rehab protocols have changed, and because we've seen players return to their former level of explosiveness. Not that surgeons have that particular injury figured out, it's still a big deal, but players can get back to very near, if not 100%, of what they were before. We don't see that nearly as often with the patellar tendon. Yes, you're going to see some studies quoted on Twitter, and if you were following along, I think I retweeted one of these last week as well, that studies show that players do get back on the field with patellar tendon injuries, but it does not say that those players get back to their former level of effectiveness. There's too many variables there to know for sure. Now, Brandon Gibson tore his patellar tendon last year and is back on the field and looks about as effective in the same reserve rotational role-playing situation as he was last year. Nate Allen is back starting at safety in Philadelphia as another decent comp, but it took Nate Allen a couple of years to get back to where he is now. Lots of other players, Ryan Williams, you mentioned Greg Childs. There's other players that have struggled to get back on the field and anywhere near what they used to be because this injury is just a tough injury. So I would not bet against Victor Cruz being in uniform in training camp for the Giants next year, but I don't think, even with the best rehab techniques and the best mental fortitude, we know that Cruz is going to rehab this injury very well. We just don't know what sort of agility, explosiveness, change of direction, chronic soreness. We don't know any of that stuff with Cruz now, and we're not going to know for a number of months. This is really a minimum 6 to 9 month recovery. It may take longer than that for Cruz. Yes, we saw Terrell Suggs come back. Yes, we saw Michael Crabtree come back. But even those guys with an Achilles injury weren't quite themselves within that 6 to 9 month period. It took them some extra time. He's got a good 9 months before training camp to recover. From a dynasty perspective, if you can get full value for Cruz, I'd look into moving him. I don't think you're going to get that. I wouldn't be cutting him at this point. I'd be hopeful that he would be, that maybe he's the guy that we point to in the future where we can say, yeah, look what these guys are doing with the patellar tendon injuries now. It's becoming less and less of an issue. And unfortunately, we're going to have the same discussion with Gerard Mayo on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be tough for him to recover in the same way. So this is an injury that would make me nervous. In the same way that some of these multi-ligament knee injuries would make me nervous, the Lattimores, those sorts of players where it's going to be tough for Cruz to overcome. Not that he'll never be back on the field again, because I don't think that's going to be the case, but I don't know that we'll see the same Victor Cruz next year that we saw in 2012, 2013.
Gene, I want to revisit a topic we talked about a bit during the waiver wire show, and it's DeMarco Murray's workload to this point. Will Brinson, great CBS NFL blogger, did a thorough piece trying to compare Murray or to predict what could happen to Murray based on the 15 other guys who accumulated 150 carries in their team's first 6 games, and then he broke it down further to the 9 guys who averaged more than 4 yards per carry on those games. And of course, the names are going to seem familiar: O.J. Simpson, Eddie George, Earl Campbell, Curtis Martin, Edgerrin James, James Wilder, Terrell Davis, Walter Payton. Not bad company. But when he went through and looked at the rest of the season production for these players, their number of carries went down, their number of yards per game went down, and with a few exceptions, their yards per carry went down, some of them significantly. Only Edgerrin James suffered a serious injury and missed a lot of time. How much stock do you put in something like this, with respect to sample size, with respect to the physiology of a player and teams' ability to know that? I want you to recap some of the stuff that you said on Tuesday, also in the waiver wire show, and just in so much as you can add it to this picture medically, or you might just throw your arms in there and say, hey, hands in there and say, look, this is all voodoo. I'm curious where you stand on this.
Well, I don't think it's voodoo. I think, first of all, not to go back to the injury-prone discussion that we've had a little bit, but this is a little bit different angle to that. It's just pure common sense that a ball carrier who takes 25 to 35 hits a game and multiple hits on a given play is going to get beat up a little bit. So if you are going to put yourself in a position to be injured, not that you're injury prone, but if you put yourself in a position to take that many number of collisions every week, the chances that you're going to feel well enough in week 7, week 8 versus how you felt in week 2, week 3 are pretty low. And we know lots and lots of players, I'm not going to talk about it that much, but when we hear discussions about, the GPS monitors and Chip Kelly sports science and, the dropping back on the number of contact practices in the preseason or dropping back on the number of contact practices during the season, the reason that we do that is because players feel like crap on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's all they can do to get ready for the next week's games. And we're talking about a player that's arguably has taken more hits than anybody else through the first 6 weeks of the season. So it just makes good sense to try to limit that going forward. There have been folks close to teams that have told me that sometimes certain teams have done player questionnaires where they'll ask players, how are you feeling? And they'll try to use that to gauge practice participation. Maybe we'll see DeMarco Murray start taking a few more veteran days off on Wednesday and Thursday. Those days are not necessarily hitting days, padded practice days, but it's just another way for him to rest a little bit. The Chip Kelly stuff that we talked about related to the GPS monitors, where they're monitoring exactly how many steps players take, exactly how often they get up to top speed, how they're moving in one direction versus the other. That may come into play with how well DeMarco Murray looks for the rest of the season, how they decide to manage his practice and game reps. All of those things are possible, but I think, I don't think it's voodoo. It's just common sense that these players that take many more hits are going to be a little bit more likely to be dinged up and have more difficulty recovering from week to week. The Cowboys have a very late bye. It's a Week 11 bye this year for them, so that may be what we're seeing is, they're starting to say, yeah, we've had to rely on him a lot to get ourselves in the position that we were in, but it probably makes sense, especially, Joseph Randle has looked pretty good, in certain situations, and they've got Des Bryant and they've got Jason Witten, and they don't necessarily need Jason Witten to block as much as they've had in the past years with as well as their offensive line is playing. So maybe they find other ways to move the ball, to take high percentage passing routes and do what DeMarco Murray has done, and maybe 20%, dropping his carries by 20% would still put him in the 18 to 22 range, and they're still getting him a lot of work. So it's something that's worth tracking. Is it a lock that you're going to see his yards per carry drop by 1 or 2 full yards per carry over the next 6 to 8 games? I don't know that that's the case. He certainly does not look in any way limited. If you watched him play last week, he was just as agile and moving as well as he had in week 1 and week 2. So I don't see any sign that he's breaking down just yet. But, and there's a lot more variables than just tracking his yards per carry. I think he's got a couple of tough games coming up here, with some defenses that he'll have to face. We'll just sort of see how it goes. It's a long-winded answer to your question, as I am prone to do at times. We'll call me long-winded prone instead of injury prone.
Hey, Gene, are you watching the game right now? Is the game on?
Yes.
Can you rewind? Because there's a replay.
Yeah, I hate Time Warner Cable.
They're not a sponsor of the show.
They would like to sponsor us.
I was waiting for this. I was waiting for the siren to go off in Cecil's room.
Never make fun of potential sponsors. WNBC.
Yes.
Right.
Because there is a. Geno Smith just got hurt.
I see Michael Vick up here. No, I saw at the corner of my eye. I have a. It's just like I'd never, ever like to see any of my nurses running in my urgent care. So in my peripheral vision, those things are. Out of my corner of my eye, I saw a trainer. So I didn't realize it was Geno.
He was hit on the front of his leg he was hit on the front of his leg, and he had his leg planted, and it kind of bent inward a little bit.
Okay. Well, those knee did they walk him off the field? Did they bring the car out?
He's back in there.
He's back.
He's in there now. So those hyperextension injuries, those mechanisms are always concerning for ACLs, PCLs, bone bruises at the top of the knee. Some guys are more flexible than others, so they can take a little bit of punishment there and just have a little bit of some soft tissue stuff around that area. Those are usually a situation where they'll bring both on the field, and then they'll bring them off to the table on the side of the field and they'll stress the knee in a number of different ways to make sure that that the knee is stable in every different direction. So it sounds like it was a pretty concerning mechanism, but if he's already back on the field, that's probably a good sign that there's nothing more concerning going on than just a little bit of some bruising and some pain that he felt when the injury first happened. It's nothing that's going to linger for him.
So part 2 of that question is then Chase Stewart, how does he handle his post-traumatic stress disorder of being a Jets fan? And he says that Twitter is his therapy. Is this a viable therapy in your estimable opinion as a pediatrician?
If used correctly and in moderation, Twitter can certainly be a estimable. Yeah, I like that. Nobody's called me estimable in a while, but I'll take it.
You're pretty inestimable and inimitable.
I'll take that one.
Okay.
It's Dr. Gene Bramall. The opinions of Dr. Gene Bramall don't necessarily reflect those of footballguys.com.
Boo, boo, boo.
On the non-football stuff. Dr. Gene, one more lap, super quick, and we
Sure.
appreciate your time. Looks like Bloom has taken a little bit of a break from us. No Sean Moreno. How the hell did he not know about that knee injury? And is his career pretty much done? I mean, at this stage, with all these knee injuries, again, it's like, all right, how much really could he possibly have left? He wasn't that hot. He had to wait forever to get a shot from Miami in free agency. They gave him nothing for a contract. So now, as a free agent, coming off yet another knee injury, can't imagine too many teams would be lined up for him.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue is not only that, but there were conditioning issues with Moreno before the season started, and a nice strenuous rehab will probably keep him in condition. But I think there are multiple red flags with Moreno's future. Does this end his career? I don't think I'd go that far yet. We've seen plenty of players, both young and older, recover from ACL injuries and recover within that 9-month time frame, if not 7 to 8. So he's got time to get ready for OTAs and show himself off to teams and potentially get brought into training camp. I think that's what's going to be. That's what it's going to take. But if he loses anything from what he was showing this year and last, I think he's going to have a hard time finding a job. Did he know that his knee was injured? Yes, I think that he did. I think it was David Chow that I saw put a video clip of when the injury looked like it happened, and you could tell that he sort of looked down at that knee and he didn't feel right away, and then came off the field, and then he didn't play much in the second half. So no, he may not have reported it. And just to look at that guy, he has a very thickly built lower body, and there are players that can sort of play through those sort of injuries. Yes, the ACL is the major stabilizing ligament of the knee, but if your compensatory, if the muscles around that area, if your quads and your hamstrings are strong enough, then you may not feel that much looseness there, and it's not an injury that generally causes as much pain. There's people were Victor Cruz and his patellar tendon, rolling around. The tendon is a much bigger structure and a much more painful injury than an ACL would be. So we've seen players walk off the field with ACLs. We don't generally see them come back and play for a long period of time, but that's not Moreno did either. I think it's unusual that he didn't report it to the training staff at all until the next day, and they didn't know that there was anything going on. But he was also not in a big hurry, and I don't think it was just how well Lamar Miller was playing. I don't think he took many snaps or had many carries after that little bit of tweak he had there, certainly after he came out in the second half. So something was going on there, and it's, like anything else, we're probably not getting the full story.
Gene, speaking of ACL recoveries and players who've recovered from ACLs, Robert Griffin III. Now we hear limited practice this week. Should we care, or is there a real chance we see Griffin before Washington's Week 10 bye?
I think that's what they're shooting for. And I think as long as Kirk Cousins continues to kill the offense with poor decision-making and untimely interceptions, that, not that RG3 has been all that more effective, but I think they're going to try to get him back. And they have clearly circled the Dallas game in Week 8 as something they'd like to get him back for. At least that's probably internally what they're hoping for. Now, Jay Gruden has said other things that, it may take him longer than that. We are not in any way putting that down in ink and saying that's exactly when he's going to be back. But they are getting him in condition to hopefully take practice next week so that he can play. I still think I would call it 50-50 at best that we'll see him there. And if he's not ready for that Week 8 game against Dallas, I think it just generally makes sense for them to hold him out then through the bye week, unless he is really that much closer to playing. But I think if he's ready to go, they'll push him and get him back before the bye. Whether or not that happens, I don't think we're going to know until probably this time Wednesday, Thursday of next week.
I'm wondering if Kirk Cousin Halloween masks or Kirk Cousin would be like a really tough thing for the Washington community right now. I wonder if there's any of those out there. But continuing with the Washington theme, there was and an ACL theme. There was a Washington running back who made the news in the past month, digging really, really deep at the bottom of the barrel of dynasty looks. And this guy's probably got a 0.5% shot of being in the NFL again. Tim Hightower. I read the news clip about Tim Hightower last month saying that after his ACL tear, he rehabbed it, but it wasn't getting better, and it took multiple visits to different specialists to figure out that he had an infection in his knee. And then they cleared out the infection, and now he's fine. He's trying to get tryouts with teams, and of course, he's not getting much success with that. But can you tell me from a medical standpoint about an infection in a knee like that while it's trying to rehab, and whether or not, him saying I'm perfectly fine, his agent saying he's perfectly fine, whether that's just agent talk or whether that could be true?
I think it could be true. There's a couple of, you could have a joint infection, infection around the knee itself where there's actually some fluid within the joint space. Those things I don't think would be all that difficult to diagnose. Makes me wonder if it's more likely that he had a little bit of infection in the bone itself, where the bone was infected. Those things can be hard to diagnose at times. The symptoms can be a little bit difficult to figure, especially within an active rehab. Are you having some soreness in that area and some swelling in that area because it's just this part of the rehab process and we're working through scar tissue, or just the natural rehab process itself, or is there something more going on? But yeah, those sorts of things, as we saw with Rob Gronkowski, it's very difficult to treat infections when they may involve grafts, surgical hardware in and around the joint, those things, and he didn't have anything like that with the ACL, but there's lots of different reasons to be concerned there. So until that would be cleared out, it'd be difficult for him to fully progress and fully rehab that knee. Hightower's issue is probably similar to that of Moreno, which is the NFL right now is full up with running backs, and there's a lot of decent players out there that, if you are not fully in form, or you're asking for any kind of money at all, these guys really aren't going to get rostered. And if you've been out of sight, out of mind for a couple of years, it's just going to be difficult for scouts who've known what you're up to come in and get a tryout. And just too many players out there on practice squads on the back ends of the rosters. Hightower would have to be a guy that would probably be a supreme special teams player to get a shot. Nobody's going to bring him in, I wouldn't think, with his injury history, with the expectation that he's going to be one of the top two backs on the roster. So, from a special teams perspective, from an injury perspective, from just the oversaturation of running backs and the state of how NFL teams are approaching the running back position right now anyway, I think it's going to be hard to see him get on a roster.
I had a buddy in college with a joint infection, but that's just because someone got blood on his roach.
Mm-hmm.
It is the Audible Live. A couple of groans there. I have to work on my material. It's the Audible Live, Dr. Gene Bramall, at Gene Bramall on Twitter, and this one to make amends with potential sponsors. I'm tipping this one for you. The Urban Wheat Ale right here from Goose Island Beer Company. It's Anheuser-Busch. So, Dr. Gene, a toast to you, brother, as I sip on this for the rest of the show. Dr. Gene, thanks, man.
Thanks, boys. I appreciate it. Have a good week, everybody.
All right, there we go. Dr. Gene Bramall, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Audible Live every Thursday night right here, youtube.com/footballguys.com. Bloom, before I get into another fantastic live read, give us a quick update on what's going on in this game.
Yeah, we just saw Tom Brady, and the Patriots' penalty problems continue to plague them, push them back to a 3rd and goal at the 19. Brady scrambles, and we see Danny Amendola make the kind of catch that I haven't seen him make since his days in St. Louis, which is it's a very Welker-esque catch, and I know people hate comparisons like this, but the comparison is down to the college and the position that these guys played, the body type, and the typical skill set they have on a play that they make that others don't make. And I call it the and Matt, we could come up with a scouting term of art for this, Cecil. I call it spinning on that x-axis. It's a receiver being able to take the hands to here and adjust in mid-jump to take the hands to the other side. So you can think of a catch radius based on the length of a player's arms and ability to high point the ball and ability to contort. But then there are the players that can make that rare that 360 axis turn while the ball's in the air, and Amendola did a terrific job with that. Comes down with the touchdown. So I think that we're seeing a game effort from the Jets here, but the Patriots are exploiting the flaws in the coverage. And I brought this up last week, I think. With the New York Jets, we have a team that has spent their last 6 first-round picks on defensive linemen and defensive backs, and they have a defensive head coach. For them to be this poor against the pass, it's just, and that play was an extended play, and Amendola made a nice play on it. But we saw the Vereen play, the busted coverage, and that comes back to coaching, and it also comes back a bit to some of these picks. Some of them have been better than others. But it's really inexcusable for a team to spend that much of their capital. And sure, they lost Revis and so on, but injuries. But this team could compete straight up with the Patriots if it wasn't for the breakdowns in pass defense.
It is the Audible Live, brought to you by FanDuel.com. Make sure you check them out, FanDuel.com. You love fantasy football. You love winning cash. How about weekly cash prizes in excess of $10 million every week at FanDuel.com? You must check it out. Weekly fantasy football revolutionizing this game that we all love. So go to FanDuel.com right now, where you can play each week as much as you want or whenever you want. It's all up to you. Win each week if you're good enough at FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Sign up today. In sticking with this Jets-Patriots game, Matt, I want to pick your brain on what you've seen on the Jets side from Geno, from Decker. We see Jay Samaro with the key drop earlier in this contest. Of course, we teased what Chris Ivory's doing tonight. So far, 107 yards rushing and 1 rushing touchdown tonight. But, Matt, tell me about your observations from the Jets tonight, Geno, Decker, and the like.
I mean, I think that, Decker has actually played fairly well against Revis, and a lot of that has to do with scheming. They've stacked the wide receivers on one side so they could give Decker some free reign away from Revis at the line of scrimmage that would get him open. So earlier in the game, that was happening. Geno Smith seems to be playing like the Geno Smith that I've observed for the past several weeks, which is he drops back. He looks for a second down at his first read. He backs up about 3 or 4 steps, takes a wide arcing turn to the outside, and either throws it away or runs, and looks a little bit like I don't know how he still looks a little ungainly as a runner, which is kind of funny because he is an athletic guy, but it's just a little strange what's going on there with that. So I would say all in all, he doesn't look like he's progressed all that much just off the cuff in terms of what he's doing with his with his reads and maybe even with what the scheme is asking him to do. There might not be as much that they're asking him to do either, and they're limiting him somewhat, because I could see that argument with maybe Mark Sanchez being in Philadelphia and actually looking good in a lot of ways in Philadelphia's offense and taking that on fairly quick, and an agent for Stephen Hill saying they didn't really develop a quarterback in New York, and even though that may be an excuse for Stephen Hill, and I would call it an excuse, there still may be some validity when you put 2 and 2 together there. And then the final thing being that he has some players who are dropping passes. Jay Samaro, he'll make a nice catch 1 minute, and like he did at Texas Tech, he'll drop a pass that's fairly easy. And so he continues to have the case of the dropsies each week. So I mean, I think a lot of it too is that you also throw in the circus of of Michael Vick. I'm thinking same player the way they run around nowadays, but with Michael Vick basically being put in there in certain situations, and this has been one of the problems with the Ryan regime, is that they fail to get guys into a rhythm and allow them to play, and there's a lot of disjointedness. And a perfect example of that is Bilal Powell, who is obviously not as good of a running back as Chris Johnson or Chris Ivory. But they put him in weird situations, and I've seen Bilal Powell have more issues with fumbled snaps, bobbling the ball, having kind of focus or concentration issues than I have, and that was not his issue as a player with the Jets. He was a disciplined player who did a lot of things right. He just didn't do anything particularly outstanding. And now it looks like he's having some minor mental issues and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's like thrown in just in the middle of it like this weird interlude, and the whole thing's disjointed. And I think that that's part of the problem with integrating players into a variety of schemes. Atlanta does it extremely well with their 4 backs. It works. They do it really well. But for whatever reason, what they're doing here in New York for years has just been horrible, and it's given Chase Stewart nightmares, obviously.
Odd substitution time for Bilal Powell, also leading to mental lapses in pass protection we see tonight. With Geno Smith, for me, stop drifting back and make your decision to run quicker. We've seen that when he does make that quick decision and he'll run just parallel to the line of scrimmage and then take off, and some design runs as well, he looks good as a runner. When he's just kind of indecisive, and I understand keeping your eyes downfield while keeping the play alive with your feet, I respect that, I appreciate that. But it's like Geno goes back and forth. Like, I'm going to run, I'm going to pass. I'm going to run, I'm going to pass. And then he tries to do something and it's just a cluster you-know-what. On the flip side, on New England, Bloom, we've gotten some clarity on the running back situation. Of course, Shane Vereen, we talked about that big touchdown catch earlier, with a couple of touchdown catches right now, also about 50 yards rushing on the night. You're seeing Jonas Gray come in. Now, Bolden did get a little bit, one catch for 4 yards so far. So Jonas Gray comes in a little bit. James White inactive. But we see mainly, as of right now, 37 passing attempts for Brady and 12 rushing attempts. That's it for this team. What do you think of these backs and the way they're using them now, sans Stephen Ridley, Bloom?
Well, you gave some key facts there. I don't know that we have clarity. I think we have clarity for what they're going to do in this game, which would have been great to know before this game. I don't know that we have clarity on how they're going to handle these running backs going forward. And let's face it, against the Jets, wouldn't you basically pass 3 times for every time you ran the ball? I mean, it's working. They're winning by 8 points. We'll see if Geno Smith can lead the Jets. They've got him, and he's got them in the red zone. And by the way, Geno Smith, I mean, the Jets have converted more than half of their first downs tonight. So Geno Smith, nothing for him to be ashamed of in this game and how he's played and keeping his team competitive. On the New England side, with Tom Brady, still the numbers look like he's back. And for the third straight game, for fantasy, he's back. And we shouldn't doubt that trend. He's still missing high. He's still only completed about 54% of his passes at this point. The Vereen touchdown, Vereen had to make a leaping catch when it could have been an easy touchdown. Again, Amendola made a really nice play on his touchdown catch. So I don't think that we're seeing Brady like throwing darts and dissecting defenses. It's the Jets, all right? It's not that hard, and Brady even increased the difficulty for some of his players on these plays. And there it is, Jeff Cumberland, a favorite, with the touchdown. So now we're going to have a very dramatic 2-point conversion here. They leave too much time, 2 minutes, 31 seconds left here, as Cumberland and Amaro sharing the tight end targets. So I don't know that you're going to look at this and say, oh, it's Shane Vereen or bust, because Shane Vereen, while he has had 14 touches tonight, one of them was a busted coverage, and the other one was a nice play call at the goal line, but we've seen Vereen not do as well on some of these play calls. So I think this is absolutely a sell-high week for Shane Vereen if you can get a price approaching the he's the answer price. Rob Gronkowski with 5 for 68. This is how far Rob Gronkowski's come back. 5 for 68, and we're disappointed, although there's still going to be we'll see. New England only has 1 timeout left. Gronkowski owners hoping, but no, overthrowing Jace Amaro there, so that hurts. The Gronkowski owners or Brady owners or anybody looking for some more production here, as they can basically get this thing down close to a minute. But again, interesting choices here coming up. Just don't do what Joe Philbin did, although Geno Smith is not exactly Aaron Rodgers. Brandon LaFell was involved early. Had a few catches downfield early. It looked like, well, he's the receiver. He's the wide receiver. He's not gotten the targets in the second half. Julian Edelman's gotten more targets, but he's dropping off a little bit. Some of this is the problem if you were starting Edelman or Gronkowski is that they were just too efficient on offense. They scored too easily, and there wasn't quite the opportunities that you would have hoped. And the Jets have kept this game close enough to make it dramatic, but not quite the fantasy feast from the passing game. Outside of Vereen, who a lot of people were probably on the fence about starting because it is the Patriots. And one last note here, yes, Brandon Bolden not touching the ball on offense. James White, a healthy scratch. Jonas Gray getting in on their first few drives and running hard, and he's a big back. But don't assume that that tells us anything about what this team will do with this backfield in any other game. Next week against Chicago will be different. Next week that week after that against Denver will be different, and so on and so forth. So we've been here before, and we should know not to assume that we can predict Bill Belichick's running back use.
Is there a good chance that Brandon Tate and Jeremy Ross could have better games than most of the Patriots wide receivers this week?
Sure. I mean, I think that we will look at. I think Jeremy Ross is a very interesting guy. Corey Fuller's an interesting guy too against New Orleans, as they've had a leaky secondary.
I'm just kind of having this. I don't know what I would call it. Maybe a Matic moment, and I'm thinking maybe what would be fun here is to kind of do a little trolling of the Patriots and say, could Kenrell Tompkins, Jeremy Ross, and Brandon Tate actually be a better receiving core as cut Patriots as opposed to the current Patriots they have? Though I think the Patriots are getting a little bit of a handicap because they do have Julian Edelman, and he's pretty darn good. So, but outside of Edelman, I'm not sure if, Brandon LaFell and whatever else they kept, Brian, Timms, all those guys, I'm not sure any of those guys are that much better or not all at all worse, So,
where's Brandon Lloyd in this conversation, Matt? I was waiting for Monday
scoring a touchdown, but he's
and cheesing.
Yeah, and cheesing. Yeah, exactly. So, but we all know Brandon Lloyd is kind of a temperamental artist of catching the football. So that's kind of his deal. He's a great artist, but he may not be a great professional.
So by the way, the Jets go for the onside kick, a Belichickian decision, actually. And it rolled around for a little while there. Somebody on the hands team, maybe Brandon LaFell. Why is Brandon LaFell on the hams team? Yeah, it is Brandon LaFell.
Hit him in the foot.
Oh,
Brandon LaFell on the hands team, and that's what you get. Although Danny Amendola comes in to save the day there. A fascinating choice. I mean, I'll give Rex credit. I don't know what's the conversion rate on onside kicks, like 10% or something like that.
Something like that.
But so we'll see what the point counterpoint here is in this in-game strategy. I don't know if that's the choice I would have gone with, simply because you're only down by 2, and a field goal can win. Nick Folk is 4 of 4. I think he's 11 of 11 this year. So if you keep that 2 points, then that gives you some focus, and you just need to make one stop. So we'll see. We'll see, Rex. We'll see.
Rex,
what do they got? No timeouts left.
Robots.
Am I seeing that right? No timeouts.
They just used the last timeout. So Belichick runs Vereen for a minimal gain, but you do exhaust that last timeout. We're here to this, and it's kind of fun to do. We haven't had a chance to do this because these games haven't been that close. Now you come to the fork in the road of do you call a run just to get it down to the 2-minute warning, or do you call a pass and risk the 2-minute warning stopping on the third down? I think with Tom Brady, you have to be willing to call a pass here, though. So perhaps that plays a little bit into Rex Ryan's thinking. I'm not sure. I'm not going to try to put myself in Rex and effects shoes, all right?
First play after the onside kick, I play action and I go downfield.
Yeah.
First play, because it's almost like when you get a fumble recovery or an interception, your first play is for the jugular. That's football 101. So Vereen up the gut, that's a little
yeah, and then they do like
timid Belichick.
And they do a little shake and bake toss, and it gets easily snuffed out, and they lose like 5 yards on it.
But Vereen stays in bounds, unlike Marion Barber. So good on you, Vereen. We'll keep you up to date as to what's going on in this game. Tom Brady looks upset. Belichick always looks upset. And the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, fellas. Let's jump into a couple other issues here around the National Football League. And I wanted to start with you, Matt, on this because we got Andre Holmes and the Oakland Raiders. Andre Holmes looking so good last couple of weeks with Derek Carr looking better. Now, Carr's a player all three of us have watched extensively from Fresno State. We saw him at the Senior Bowl. We know about the, poster mechanics and everything that goes into Derek Carr pre-draft. We also know under pressure he fell apart. What have you seen specifically this last week when he went toe-to-toe getting beat up against San Diego, distributing the football, making the most of Andre Holmes and company? Matt, your thoughts on this Raiders offense now, including Darren McFadden, with Holmes and the way that Derek Carr's playing? You look at the matchup this week, you say, okay, Arizona a bit tougher, but what have you liked from Derek Carr and how he's looking better now?
Well, I haven't seen Derek Carr this week because I haven't watched the Raiders game yet. That's on my agenda, but it's not. But it hasn't been anything I've seen. But in the past weeks, I have seen Carr, and certainly, I would say that he's handled himself pretty well. He hasn't fallen apart under pressure to the level that you saw in some instances, again, at Fresno State. And it was one of those things that if he shows that he's able to handle pressure, he has all the tools to become a good NFL quarterback. Good not being, top 5 good, but certainly, some in the range of Joe Flacco, at least in terms of what Flacco does on a weekly level of production. He's capable of having a huge game and then capable of also being, someone who can manage the team but make big plays. Andre Holmes, to me, is still a guy that the jury's out for me, mainly because I still think he's, from what I've seen, I haven't seen this week's game, but I saw more of a one-dimensional player who's hot one week and not so much the next. And I've been more kind of on James Jones, train in that regard, on his bandwagon, and thinking that he's kind of the more consistent play on a week-to-week basis. So I'm interested in watching this, but I would love to know what you guys think about what you've seen in Oakland, because I haven't seen last week's game against San Diego yet.
Well, Andre Holmes coming through 2 weeks now, Bloom. We did tease it a bit on the preview show. We get to kind of, stretch our wings out a bit more on the live show. Your thoughts here, Bloom, on DMC, on Carr, and on Andre Holmes?
Well, the whole offense has to be taken in a different light than what we expected coming in. By the way, it was a run. I don't know if it's Jonas Gray out there getting that run. I couldn't tell. It wasn't Vereen. But they just concede, and they're going to punt. So this is going to be fascinating to watch, see what Geno Smith can do. Geno Smith is no stranger to this kind of game situation. This is going to be fun to watch. Anyway, what I've observed about Carr, and I think we've seen a lot. We've talked a lot about Carr, so there's context here to what we've already said about him. One of the things that we couldn't really know about him was whether his ability to be comfortable in a scheme and executing certain play calls was extendable or scalable, for those of you who've had IT experience like myself, scalable to a different offense, different kinds of plays, different kinds of decisions, different kinds of throws, a faster tempo of a game, and so on. And we're seeing that. Offensive line has to be given some credit here, although Carr has to be given some credit here. I don't know what the exact number is. I think it was they'd only given up 5 sacks going into last week, and he's been doing an incredible job minimizing sacks. And again, the offensive line has to get some credit here, but also just not looking like a rookie, not looking like somebody as I'm fond of saying, the game is giving him meaningful instructions. He's actually only suffered 3 sacks so far this year. The game is giving him meaningful instructions, and he looks calm and collected. His body language, his decisiveness, all appear to me that what we saw from Derek Carr at Fresno State at times was outside of the structure of a play, he just kind of floated. I'm thinking of Matt Castle. There was no sense of a strategy. Yeah. Well, there's no sense of a strategy or some sort of framework to deal with that. And you did see him function really well within the framework of the plays. Now I think we're seeing him with the peace of mind and trust in his weapons too. I mean, the play that Jason Verrett made, the interception to end that game last week, was a play where he was giving his guy a chance to make a play, and it wasn't a bad throw, or, I mean, we can discuss whether it was a smart throw or not. So I'm just seeing Derek Carr look, from what we can tell from the outside, look like a much more composed quarterback against NFL defenses and in an NFL scheme this early. And again, the offensive line has to get some of the credit there. As far as Andre Holmes goes, I'll just keep beating this point into the ground. He's playing the way we want Justin Hunter to play. He's using his length, he's using his speed, he's aggressive, he's got my ball mentality, he's more consistent than Hunter, and that's a low bar. And these situations, I think, tend to have a snowball effect, where quarterback trusts receiver delivers on that trust, quarterback's more willing to take those chances, and you have a snowball effect and confidence on both sides of the equation. And then Darren McFadden, and I don't really have much to say about Darren McFadden except what I've already been saying about him all season, which is if you've watched at Oakland, he's been playing well. He's been running hard. He's finishing runs. He doesn't look too impatient for Darren McFadden. He's making plays in the passing game. I'll go back to another play that he made a few weeks ago in the passing game on a wheel route in the end zone on a 25 or so yard pass where he went over top of the defensive back and tried to reach over the defensive back, like the kind of plays that if wide receivers make those plays, we're fanning ourselves and saying, wow, that's a play. And he actually got a penalty called in the end zone on the defender because of the excellent bid he made on the ball. And we saw when the Raiders used him as primarily as a receiving back, he was extremely dangerous. I've seen Darren McFadden run routes and breaks at a stem that no cornerback can hang with. So I'm excited about this offense. I'm excited about the possibilities. James Jones is another good name to bring up, Matt, because you're seeing he and Carr also have that trust where he's doing the same thing Aaron Rodgers did, throwing some back shoulder balls, throwing some balls to allow James Jones to win the ball in the air. So I think that it's very easy to fill in the blanks with Oakland since Reggie McKenzie took over. Oakland sucks. Every player they pick sucks. Everyone they trade for sucks. Everything's going to suck. But the story is changing. It could change back. Ask the Giants. It can change back very quickly. But the story's changing.
Jets are driving
Yep.
and completing passes and getting first downs and
Getting out of bounds.
Field goal range with 8 seconds left. Yeah, they're getting out of bounds consistently, and Gino is making very quick, decisive reads and
bite-sized chunks too, understanding exactly what he needs to do. And this goes back to what I'm saying about Nick Folk being 11 for 11. Now with no timeouts, this play call with 8 seconds left is just crucial, though.
Yeah, it's got to be to the sidelines as we watch Geno Smith in the shotgun. So it looks like Chris Ivory next to him.
Throws it away. So, 56-yarder, I think that 55, 56-yarder, I think that Nick Folk has already made one close to this long this year. So
you'd have to feel confident with Nick Folk going on for the game-winning field goal. Back on Andre Holmes as we get him prepared to get out there, and we'll keep you updated what happens. Air yards per target, he's 17th in the NFL, 13.45. Bloom, you brought up the willingness to let his guys make a play. One of the most enjoyable things about watching Derek Carr over the last couple of weeks is the fact that he's aggressive. Guys can work well in the system. Guys can look good under pressure, checking down. Blocked. And Rex Ryan is blocked.
Sorry, Chase.
Yeah, there goes your opportunity, Belichick. Reinforcement. No, it's right. High fives abound. Although, what was it, Bob Kraft with Marky Mark, like that high five that he just missed? Mm-hmm. That was awkward. Back on Derek Carr quickly before we move on to a different subject. It's the aggression that you love to see because there's plenty of young quarterbacks that can handle pressure by just going dump off and dump off and dump off. And when you see Andre Holmes and the routes that he's running, the aggression that they show downfield, better downfield numbers than Alshon Jeffrey or Deshaun Jackson or Des Bryant or Emmanuel Sanders, Kelvin Benjamin, Brandon LaFell, and Julio Jones. He's right above Julio Jones in air yards per target. So it's good to see the confidence, it's good to see the willingness to have his playmakers make plays, and it's good to see the aggression to go downfield. Staying in the AFC West as we continue on in the Audible Live. Matt, back to you for this one, and Bloom, jump in after Matt. It's the Ryan Matthews thing and the role that Oliver is carving out for himself. What kind of role? How large of a role is that for Matthews, who, again, they could bring him back and save him up for a playoff run. Maybe Oliver takes the starting job, but there still will be a committee. How much of a role is there with Oliver and Matthews healthy in the same backfield, which we will see soon enough? Now, not anytime soon, maybe a couple of more weeks for Ryan Matthews, but we know that it's coming. We know that Oliver is performing every week. So what kind of a role does Matthews come back to? Does he come back to being a backup? Does he come back to being the starter and the full-time guy, or does he come back to being the starter and he's in a 50-50 committee?
It's a good question because I think a lot of people are very excited about what they've seen from Brandon Oliver, and when you look at what Oliver's done, he has played First you've seen him up against the Jets, and the Jets, in my opinion, didn't really know how to tackle in that game, and Oliver made the most of that. Then he played the Raiders, and I haven't seen that game yet, but the Raiders are also known for being a less than disciplined team. So I think there's been 2 straight weeks where people have had plenty of reasons statistically to get excited about a player who is a pretty good option, who can break some tackles, who's got some quickness, and he can catch the football out of the backfield. I think that's enough to say that as long as Ryan Matthews isn't completely healthy, Brandon Oliver is going to have a significant role in the offense. The question becomes, what happens when he has to play, defenses that are maybe playing a little bit tougher, quality of run defense. At that point, that's what I really want to see as a litmus test game for him, and I don't think I've seen that yet. I think the safe thing to say is the knee injury, Ryan Matthews not really working out yet, the slowness to heal on that end. There's probably a good shot that it's going to start off as a 50-50 look. And there's reason to have some optimism that Oliver will maintain that because of the fact that they let Marion Grice go, the fact that they don't have anybody else because Danny Woodhead is out for the year, and that means that they can use somebody in that type of a Woodhead role or in a mixed role of being both a every down back who can catch the ball in the backfield. So I'm not as excited, obviously, as you can tell about Brandon Oliver as some people are going to be, but I do think that but it doesn't limit me from not wanting to go after him and not thinking that. I do think that he can be a decent flex player for you when Matthews comes back. But if Matthews comes back completely healthy, Danny Woodhead was a top 12 player in the first half of last season. Where did he go at the end of the season? He was pretty much a bust at this point. I think people would have been trading for Woodhead in the first half of the season, and then he disappeared like some mythical sea monster underwater, basically, and it was the Ryan Matthews show. He got 61% of the touches, or every time he was on the field in certain formations, he saw the ball 61% of the time. I saw something from Adam Harstead today on Twitter about that. And that was most in the NFL. So when you're looking at Ryan Matthews as far as being a bell cow back, that possibility is there. So I'm not going to discount Matthews because of the fact that he's got banged up. It's the same excuse people use for DeMarco Murray. Oh, he gets hurt all the time. DeMarco Murray gets hurt all the time. He's a good back, and when he's on the field, he plays well. Ryan Matthews, what happened to him the first couple years of his career? Yeah, he was immature. Sometimes he sucked. Sometimes he got hurt and didn't know how to handle it. But for the past couple of years, he's been a different person. He's been a grown-up version of Ryan Matthews. Yeah, and he's played like it. So if we're going to give Darren McFadden a chance to be a good back now, after all the times he has sucked, other than one season out of his career, I would like to hear people kind of get off of Ryan Matthews back a little bit because he got banged up in this particular game or this particular season after he's played well. So to me, the smart deal still is Brandon Oliver, sure, rely on him. Think of him maybe as at worst running back 3 or running back 4 when Ryan Matthews comes back. And I still think the smart play is if you can buy him low, I would take Ryan Matthews low, just like I've been recommending Ben Tate low, even though I like Isaiah Crowell. If you can get both of those guys, those 2 pairs of backs, if you're looking for running backs, wouldn't be a bad set of 4 to have down the stretch.
Bloom, what kind of role is Brandon Oliver making for himself?
Yeah, and I'm going to go almost the opposite direction here, just because I feel like, and I've had this sensation since the lead up to the game last week, and it's a sensation and it's a gut feeling. It could just be, what did I have for lunch today? It was a burger. It was a pretty good burger too. Look, Brandon Oliver is a classic example of the way that we like to write the next chapter of the story before it happens and say, well, his value is temporary, he's going to be unreliable, and we can just pencil in that he has an endpoint of X for his value persisting. Well, we can already see that what started out as a 4 or 5 week injury. What was the first prognosis? We don't have Dr. Gene here to remind us. I think it was 4 or 5 week injury. I think that was the time frame that was given on it whenever Matthews got hurt in week 2. Well, here we are now, 5 weeks later. He has not started running yet. Okay. I do remember that when Dr. Gene broke down Ryan Matthews' injury, he said, well, these knee injuries have to do with looseness in the knee, and coming back from these injuries have to do with the player feeling like their knee doesn't have looseness, that they trust it. Okay. Now, Ryan Matthews is also saying that, well, I'll start running when they tell me I can start running. So between the doctors and how they're interpreting what he's telling them, and and how he feels, or just how they're letting him proceed with this injury, and perhaps part of it is that Oliver's playing so well they're saying don't rush him back. The point is that we don't know how much longer Oliver's going to be this lead back. Donald Brown's still not out of concussion protocol. Then after that, sure, we want to put him in a box and say, well, when Ryan Matthews comes back, surely Brandon Oliver's role will be limited to this. But the reality is he's playing well. He's playing extremely well. He's doing great work as a receiver out of the backfield. He's doing work as a runner between the tackles. And he's also, what we saw last week was, he finished out the game for them. I mean, they basically said, win the game for us. And he won the game for them. These things create equity. I don't think that Ryan Matthews is the kind of player that they automatically are going to put in cement for 20 carries a game. I think that if Brandon Oliver, this is what was happening with Brandon Oliver and Donald Brown, and I was a little slow to pick up on it, and I apologize to people who rely on me for waiver wire advice, that really, I thought it was just that Brandon Oliver was playing the second half of the game and Donald Brown was playing against a more hyped-up defense. But no, Brandon Oliver's a better running back than Donald Brown right now. He might be as good or effective, at least, in the Chargers' eyes, as Ryan Matthews. I don't think there's anything, if Brandon Oliver doesn't slow down, why would the Chargers say, well, you've been doing well and we're playing well with you in the offense, but let's go back to putting you to 5 or 6 touches a game? Because what? I mean, every time a player has success, that lays the foundation for more success. And I don't think we should assume that there's a limit on Oliver's role or upside when Matthews comes back. Matthews is not going to the bench. Matthews is not going to come to the backup to Oliver. But I really think that you don't just put a player back on the bench who's playing well because it's just not his turn anymore. I don't know. That being said, a lot of times what coaches do baffle me.
But it's Mike McCoy, and one thing that I'll say about Mike McCoy is if he finds something that works, he's going to keep going back to what works. And, this isn't a regime that is tied to Ryan Matthews. That was a different regime, a different time. And essentially, what we saw in Denver with, McGahee and Moreno now, they just use them up. Hey, let's just use up the guy and go with our guy, go with what works, and have faith in Mike McCoy. Matt, before we move on, anything to retort there, or should we move on to the next one?
I felt like I was in a Jon Stewart, Bill O'Reilly debate, so I felt pretty good on that one. So I felt like Bill O'Reilly on that one. So
okay. Well, then we're good. We're friends. So. We're good. Well, no, and I want to say that this was sort of a thing that was bugging me, and it didn't really galvanize until I watched him in the second half of that game last week and thought the Chargers are riding him. It's like a jockey down the stretch, and they're saying, come on, bring this home for us.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think you made really good points, and I think that the point that really if he's playing well, then they're going to stick with him. I think also the fact that if Ryan Matthews isn't running yet, then hell, what are you waiting on him for? Because it's, if it's been 5 weeks and he's still not running and you've got a good player playing, then you at this stage of the game, you kind of have to say, we're going to stick with Brandon Oliver for as long as this train is rolling down the track. You're not going to sit there and say Ryan Matthews, because what are they going to do? Like, he doesn't play well next week and go, oh, well, Ryan, get up off your behind and start running right now. I mean, is that really what they're doing? No. And Donald Brown, we know Donald Brown. I mean, yeah, Donald Brown is. Can he get outside one time a game, and can he catch a screen pass once in a while?
You're right. I want to jump off on that really quick because I do think it's really funny about Donald Brown that in a limited role and compared to Trent Richardson, and maybe that's the key to reviving your career as running back, is playing the same backfield as Trent Richardson. Because next to Trent Richardson, all of a sudden Donald Brown started to look like a dynamic back last year. Remember? We're like, wow. And I remember maligning the Colts for not re-signing him because, hey, it's working. He's riffing with this offense and these plays and things. And they let him go, and I thought this is going to be a really good signing for San Diego because of this idea of Ryan Matthews insurance. And Donald Brown looked like the guy for the first 3 years in Indy that we were disappointed with. We said, this guy was a first-round pick? What?
Look, and then we got to bring up Ahmad Bradshaw because Ahmad Bradshaw and Fred Jackson are two players that I have this theory that I've been kind of working on the RSP blog, which is the whole idea that if it's kind of out there, but it's fun. If aliens were to come down from another planet and say that they were going to take over the world, but they would challenge the human race to a game of football, and they have the technology for the human race to pick anybody who's ever played the game to represent the human race to play for the planet, who would you have as your starting team to defend the planet? So, for instance, I had people vote on this, and Brett Favre and John Elway were certainly part of that defend the planet kind of team. And I nominated Steve Smith this week as a guy who would be on my defend the planet roster. But I think the way that Ahmad Bradshaw and Fred Jackson, who are old as dirt, Ahmad Bradshaw probably has stuff hanging out of his body that shouldn't be hanging out. He's got to stuff back in with pads so he can play, and he's still out playing a #1 draft pick who and playing extremely well and is a great fantasy option. You look at that, and these guys got to at least be on the bench for your team, because if the star gets hurt, they're going to come in there and they're like the Black Knight in the Monty Python movies where they it's like, oh, it's just merely a flesh wound, and they could. Ahmad Bradshaw could be running around on a stump and probably gain yards the way that he's going. These guys are just great, and it makes you sad when you look at a guy like Trent Richardson and think, you have all this physical ability. What is going on in here?
All right, we'll call it a draw. And by the way,
no, not a draw. Trent Richardson lost.
He did. And my team lost, heavily invested in Trent Richardson. They want to do a Space Jam sequel. I think Matt just came up with it because Space Jam, awesome, Michael Jordan, great. But they need to do a Space Jam sequel, but with football.
It would be like, it'd be like Armageddon. We could have Armageddon, and Brett Favre could be the quarterback. He would be like one of those oil drill riggers who,
right.
I'm telling you, he would be. It would be perfect, and he's got the mentality. I mean, obviously, I think he'd fit. He's the guy who just doesn't care.
Yeah, he's a roughneck. That is for sure. All right, one more thing here before we go, fellas, and tie a bow on tonight's show. The Audible Live each and every Thursday night here on YouTube.com/FootballGuys, DOTCOM. That's where you can watch us act silly and look goofy. Plus, you can see Bloom show about the catch radius. That was awesome. See, we need you out on a football field doing that, Bloom, where you can do the
RSP
spinning
film room
catch.
Stuff. RSP, we can do some RSP film room stuff like that.
There you go. There you go.
These thumbs together up here, and
then
together.
I was doing that with Rivers McCown and them, but we were only doing it on a podcast, so nobody could see it, and that was funny. I was sitting there showing it, and they're going, "We can't see any of that." I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably true."
So you selfish, unloving, environmentally destructive being.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, he doesn't love me.
He's the king of all kings. He is Zook. Final topic I just wanted to bend both of you guys' ear on. Something that I've said on the show before, and I wanted to get both of your takes on it, because we see some rookie backs now, and I'll save the Trey Mason topic for another time, but I've said it before. I want to hear both of your reactions, because there's a lot of fantasy owners out there looking at rookie backs, and there's a lot of people heavily invested in Bishop Sankey. There's also a lot of people now that are looking towards Storm Johnson. For me personally, when you look at both of these all-purpose backs and a fairly similar skill set, I believe that Storm Johnson runs hotter and with more kinetic energy but good receivers, good runners, can run between the tackles. Not the fastest, not the biggest, but good all-around backs. I've said it before, Bloom. I'm more excited about Storm Johnson than I am about Bishop Sankey, and that has nothing to do with his footwork. But your thoughts here, because I know, Bloom, we have a lot of fantasy owners checking in on Twitter, Facebook, etc., email, saying, okay, Storm's got an opportunity here, even though Gus Bradley wants to limit that opportunity. So your thoughts on just these two rookie backs, Sankey or Storm, which one are you feeling, man?
Well, if we were talking about this in terms of price tag and bang for the buck, I think that we would have said even back in May that it's Storm Johnson. But if we're going to assess these two backs and contrast them, I think both of them are in positions right now where we can't truly evaluate them. In Sankey's case, in both cases it's the quality of the team. But particularly in Sankey's case, I think we have head games going on with Ken Wisenhunt. And in Storm Johnson's case, it's just the offensive line and just the state of the offense in general. So I don't know we can fully evaluate these guys, but I think to compare and contrast them, Sankey, and we were all surprised, well, I shouldn't say we were all, but Sankey's combine numbers didn't necessarily align with what we saw in the field. I mean, based on Sankey's combine numbers, I know you have Spark and you have all these equations where you plug all the numbers in and you come up with some aggregate score or something, and I know Sankey had measured well in those ways, but you didn't necessarily see those things on the field. And in atomic moments, even this year, you can see the lateral agility, you can see the burst, you can see the juice in his legs, but for what? Employed for what? Whereas with Storm Johnson, and bringing up Fred Jackson, I think that's a name that we've brought up before, Matt, when we've talked about Storm Johnson. It's just effort. I mean, it's effort, intensity, desire. Storm Johnson is not a physically talented back. Physically, he's just a guy. And it's not like Sankey has a bad effort on his runs or anything like that. It's just efficiency. So the verdict's still out. I'll say this. With Bishop Sankey, and I'm not going to name any names, but I do hope one of my missions, and by all means, I want this turned back on me. So please, in fact, we've got a fly. There's a fly around me. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted. I should be like a lizard, just go and eat it while I'm talking. That'd be fantastic. One of these days, I'm working on that. So what the problem here is that when we watch these running backs and not being able to evaluate them and seeing somebody like Bishop Sankey compared to what we expected, I think what skewed a lot of redraft, not dynasty, but redraft analysis, and again, turn this back on me because I'm sure that I employ some things that need to be updated or need to be tossed out. But I saw a lot of, and I'm going to be a little bit harsh here, harsher than I usually am. I saw analysis, I saw basically, a trivia masquerading as analysis when people were recommending drafting Bishop Sankey this year. And how that happened was people said, well, the last 12 running backs that were taken as the first running back in the draft averaged this. It has nothing to do with Bishop Sankey. Different running backs, different situations, different coaches. You might as well just say the last 12 players who were drafted numbers 65 overall, or the last guys who had exactly 12 letters in their name or something. It's a very tenuous factor. And I mean, I did see multiple people were citing this as a good reason to draft Bishop Sankey in the mid-rounds. And I think what I'm getting at here is expectations. Expectations as the first running back drafted off the board. Expectations as, well, who else does Tennessee have? And things like that. Also, perhaps expectations that Tennessee's offense was going to be more functional than it is, or the team for that matter. So I think that we all make mistakes with rookies, and I made a big one with Cody Latimer. I had egg on my face about Cody Latimer. Paul Richardson is another guy. It doesn't mean when a rookie doesn't get pushed early, does it mean that he's not good or he's a bust? I am guilty of this as anybody, all right? We all have to chill on the accelerated timelines for rookies. Yes, some of these guys are going to do it. I was saying it earlier today. No less than 10 rookie wide receivers look like they belong on an NFL field right now, which is astounding. 6 weeks into these guys' career, we can go down and count them off. These guys, they look like they belong. I mean, I'm saying these words carefully. They look like they belong on an NFL field 6 games into their career. And we have Richardson's not playing, Latimer's not playing. So this was a monumental class, but we can't continue to hold players to this standard, or we're going to continue to miss players. So I want to say, with all of this Sankey talk, it's early. It's really, really early. And obviously, Ken Whisenhunt's been messing with his head.
Matt, your thoughts, Sankey or Johnson?
Yeah, that was long. That was like, hey. Matt, that was the closest I ever went to, like, that was like a Coltrane solo. You know, that was like that. You know, I just couldn't.
You did just see widespread panic.
Right there, man. But yeah, I would say that. I mean, I would like to respond to a few things here, but we'll talk about the backs. I agree that Storm Johnson is probably the better bang for the buck, but again, anytime an offensive line is craptastic, it kind of scares me, because I think that even Toby Gerhart probably got a little bit of a raw deal, on top of the fact that maybe he wasn't a great fit for that specific run scheme on top of that. So I'm a little bit leery of Storm Johnson in this case. I would go with Bishop Sankey this year moving forward, just because of the fact that he is going to get he should get enough carries and maybe there's something that they can build on with him. I mean, if they're going to build on him as being at least getting as many carries as Storm Johnson, then I would say you go towards who's getting the most touches when it comes to that point. So I'm just going to take the pragmatic answer there and say whoever gets the most touches I feel better about right now, because again, I agree, offensive line, coaching staff, first year, whatever, that's one thing. You just can't really judge. I tend to recommend to people, look, first rookies, don't count on them. I mean, the Paul Richardson thing, perfect example. Cody Latimer, I think you're being way too hard. Did you recommend Cody Latimer to go in the 10th round? Did you recommend him to go in the 12th round? Or did you recommend him to go in the 18th or 19th round, or at the very end of your draft? And to me, it's like, if you're recommending a player to go at the end of your draft because you're saying, look, he's a home run swing, that's really what you're doing, well, then you understand that you're going to strike out on those types of things. The whole recommendation has been made this whole time is that, look, pick him. If he doesn't start right away, drop him, because it's not, he's not really going to be a guy that you're going to want to hold on to all season long at this stage of the game. And I look at a guy like Marvin Jones, who we talked about, earlier in this show, who his first year he didn't do anything. Chad Johnson, flashed a little bit here and there, but someone like Marvin Jones didn't do anything his first year, and it wasn't because he wasn't good enough. It was who they had established ahead of time, and sometimes teams are more cautious with their rookies. They want to put them in situations where they feed them a little bit slower. Once Marvin Jones gets on the field, people were like, who the heck is this guy and what's he doing? He was doing the same stuff he was doing all along, Back at Cal, at the Senior Bowl, you see all of that there. Some coaches are like, we're just going to ramrod this player in there, Brian Quick, and hopefully he'll learn, or he'll drown when we put the fire hose in his face, And fortunately for Brian Quick, he's starting to get better. Cordero Patterson, another example of a great athlete who cannot run a route. If you watch him run routes, he cannot get off the line of scrimmage. He's got all that speed. He's got that strength. He does not know what to do he tries to avoid the defensive back. When you try to avoid a defensive back, immediately that says two things. A, you're raw as steak tartare, and then on top of that, you are not going to get separation at the end of your routes, because you are not getting into the man and making his hips turn, and you're not showing the savvy to figure out how to do that. So when I look at some of these receivers and I look at some of these players in the draft right now, I never look at the first year unless they're getting a ton of opportunities. So to me, it is fair if Bishop Sankey from this point on starts getting 10 to 15 touches a game,
and looks the way that he has, kind of up and down, then I'm going to say I feel pretty good about what I think he is. But if he's only going to get 3 to 5 touches a game, they're going to come at weird periods, and they're going to put him in there on draw plays or put him on plays that are just going to maximize what he can do well, or put him in situations where they're going to hand him the ball and it's a Rex Ryan type of play call where everyone knows it's coming and it's going to be against 9 stacked in the box, then the jury's still going to be out on these guys. So, with rookies, they can make a huge impact for you, but really what it is knowing what they can and what they can't do, what their style is, what their fit is, and the rest of it is good luck. Hopefully they acclimate quickly enough, and if they do, hop aboard as fast as you can. You're basically, with rookies, chasing a bus and hoping that maybe you can get on it, without it leaving you in the dust.
And there we have it. The Audible Live each and every Thursday night right here at youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. We thank everyone for listening. Bloom, final thoughts tonight.
Final thoughts. I was actually just revisiting an old Chris Ivory thread back at the Shark Pool about, hey, maybe down the line Chris Ivory could get a chance to be the lead back that he looks like he has in him. And we saw that tonight, and he was really setting the tone for this team, and it's going to be interesting to see if they allow him to get up to 21 carries going forward as a regular thing. Certainly Rex Ryan is a guy that's coaching for his job at this point, so I would be inclined to do that if I had any say. And I think that this was a really tremendous Thursday night game, and last week's Thursday night game was tremendous, and it was a precursor to an amazing Sunday of football. Cease this week. I mean, we've got Denver, San Francisco coming up. We've got New Orleans and Detroit coming up. We've got games that are going to be extremely compelling. Maybe not the Monday night game. It's in Pittsburgh. Carolina and Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton. That alone could be a show that leaves all of our jaws on the ground as we watch these two quarterbacks the way they're playing. The Giants and Dallas. We're getting up to speed and cruising altitude in the NFL now. The fact-finding section is over. Now it's time to be decisive, and it's time to sit back and enjoy it because, as I've said before, every week. I mean, I was just mentioning last Thursday's game against Houston against Indy. That was a week ago. It feels like a month ago. So much happens in every season, and it is a real joy and pleasure and privilege to get to do something I would normally do, which is just get immersed in this and swim around in this ocean and get to do it and somehow call it a job. So everybody out there, I appreciate that you continue to give me the opportunity to do that.
Matt Waldman, final thoughts tonight.
I think it's watching Rex Ryan coach and watching him and knowing what kind of a coach he is based on talking to some players who've worked with him. I think that Rex Ryan would be an excellent defensive coordinator. I would like to see him back in that role for a good team, but not as a head coach. I think what we've seen in the long run is that he's the type of defensive coordinator that you would love to bring into a team where the defensive coordinator was horrible, where the defensive players didn't really have the same pride in what they do as a locker room compared to the offensive players, and you stick Rex Ryan in there and let him just whip that unit into shape and be that rallying point for them. But that's it. Don't let him take over the rest of your program. Just keep them in that area and let them work that. And I think that you could have a dynamite team. But I'm hoping for Jets fans that they put this regime to a merciful end fairly soon because because I think that they've given him more than enough time. And what we're seeing here is, not really great play. And it's a fascinating thing to be able to look at the way teams develop and what they do. And I got to credit the Jets for the patience that they have had with Rex Ryan. And maybe it has started to do with the fact that he led them to AFC Championship games 2 years in a row, and with a rookie, with a young quarterback nonetheless, that should give you enough cachet to give you a little bit of time. So, but I would still say in today's world where NFL teams have the patience of a flea when it comes to coaches and to regimes and development, kudos to the Jets, even though they get made fun of a lot by non-Jets fans and even some Jets fans.
because I think they went the right route. Hopefully they'll get rewarded by picking a better coach down the line.
And somehow I feel this stat came from Chase, from our dear friends at ProFootballReference.com. The Jets are the 132nd team since 1991 to possess the ball 40 minutes or more in a regulation game. They're just the 12th to lose. From 91 till now. From 2006 till now. How's that for professional radio guy? We thank all of you for listening, for watching on YouTube, subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM, for checking us out on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, however you take in the Audible. We appreciate each and every one of you. So, for the fantastic Dr. Gene Rammel, for the great Matt Waldman, and the beautiful and wonderful Sigmund Bloom, getting all dressed up tonight for a great Thursday night game, I'm Cecil Lammy saying thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty.